Hi everyone, my name is Dave, and welcome to Extra Credit, a video series where we take an unscripted look at topics related to local history and exploring that history. All right, so as we normally do, just a quick reminder to, first of all, visit my website. You'll find a link in the description. There's all kinds of information there related to the topics that we take a look at in this video series, as well as you're going to find a section with links to all the past episodes of Extra Credit, so you can go back and take a look at episodes that you've missed, or maybe catch up on ones that maybe you haven't seen in a while. Also, you can follow me on social media, so you'll find me on things like Facebook, you'll find me on Instagram, and you'll find me on Twitter. And finally, if you haven't already done so, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification button. There's all kinds of content that drops on the channel regularly, particularly in the spring, the summer, and the fall when we're out hiking. And by subscribing and turning on the notifications, you'll get that content much quicker than if you wait for it to come out on social media. All right, so we're back in the cozy confines of camp. It's a little chilly out here. The heat is waiting for the heat to kick in here. So today's episode, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be revisiting a topic that we took a look at last winter, which is a question and answer episode. So last winter we did a Q&A and basically kind of talked a little bit about sort of questions that I get from time to time. So this is a follow-up to that. This is a part 2, and we're going to take a look at some common questions that I get. So this one's kind of interesting because what it revolves around is taking a look at, because I spend a lot of time outdoors, I spend a lot of time hiking, what are my best and worst experiences in the outdoors? All right, so there was a bit of thought that went into putting this together. I was trying to go through my head and thinking about all the best and worst experiences that I've had out in the outdoors. And certainly there's been a lot of both. I've been hiking well before I started getting into some of my history explorations. I've been probably kind of doing quite a bit of hiking since I started driving when I was 16, where I could actually get into the outdoors. So I did come up with a list. I sort of thought it through and kind of came up with some ideas. So what I've done is I've come up with my worst and then my best experiences. I'm going to give you a couple of the top 2 ones, and then I'm going to list some of my honorable mentions. So let's start with the worst ones. Maybe go from worst to best and maybe end on a positive note. So my worst experiences, let's start with the honorable mentions. And I've got a few of them. The first one, it's hard maybe to classify this as being truly a worst experience. Certainly it was interesting. Maybe it might be up there with one of my better experiences, just simply because of the way that it planned out. So let's rewind back to 1994. And this was the first year that I began sort of hiking and researching the Port Arthur, Duluth, and Western Railway. And I began sort of tracing the entire length of the railway line. So in August of that year, I had made a trip to the Boundary Waters area. So essentially where the railway grade comes very, very close to the Minnesota border. And I was going to follow the last sort of section of railway line from North Lake all the way to its Canadian terminus at Gunflint Lake. Now, it was a bit of a challenge at the time to actually get into North Lake because there was a huge washout just to the east of Addy Lake, which is the lake before you get to North Lake. And so you had to walk in, and I didn't have an all-terrain vehicle. And so what I did was I walked in, and it's several miles. I'm trying to think in my head. It was probably about, I would say, I'm trying to think off the top of my head now. It's got to be probably in the 4 or 5 mile range, if not more. Maybe I'll put the exact measurement up on the screen here because I'm sort of struggling to remember. So I had to walk in to where I was going to kind of at least somewhat start my exploration. And that was to the property that belonged to some family friends on North Lake. And what they were going to do is they were going to give me a boat ride down to where I was going to kind of start the hike from, which was at the intersection of Little Gunflint and Gunflint Lake. So basically there's a chain of 4 lakes. There's North, there's Little Gunflint, and Gunflint. Now I had seen parts of the railway grade already from having been hunting and been in the area before. Now, there was kind of an impediment at the western end of North Lake, which was something called Trestle Bay. Trestle Bay was an area where there was, and it's called Trestle Bay. I think its real name is supposed to be Goose Bay, but Trestle Bay was called that because there was a 1,000-foot trestle that once spanned the bay, and the trestle was destroyed in a forest fire in 1909. And so you basically had to boat around the trestle. So basically I got a ride around there, and I proceeded to kind of hike the railway grade from there all the way to its Canadian terminus. So this was supposed to be a kind of a several day sort of endeavor, and I had made arrangements for the family friends to come back and pick me up after a few days. And this is the day before, phones and satellite messaging and things like that. So there was no real way to contact these people. So basically the first day I had done a piece of the hiking, and then I got up on the second day and basically hiked from where I was camped on the Narrows between a little Gunflint, and I walked. And again, I don't remember the exact distance. I'll put it up on the screen, but I walked all the way to the end of Gunflint and back. Once I had finished that, I had essentially done all my hiking, and I decided that I don't want to be out here anymore. I'm exhausted because I had walked so much. And so basically what I did was I packed up all my gear and put them in my big pack sack, my big backpack, my hiking one. I had this big giant one that I had from my military days, and I basically walked the several miles back to Trestle Bay. And now I had a problem because in order for me to get back to the property to finish my hike, I had to get around Trestle Bay, and there was no way. There was a bit of a trail that you could go around the bay, but I mean, it was a several kilometer detour, and I wasn't up to that. So, back when I was a little bit younger and a little bit crazier, I actually stripped down to a pair of swimming shorts, packed my clothes that I was wearing and my boots in a couple of garbage bags, and left my pack on the west side of the bay and proceeded to swim across the bay. And it was a particularly windy day. And so you can imagine swimming 1,000 feet across this bay with one arm like this, put around this bag, these garbage bags full of my clothes, and swam across the bay, got to the other side, got out of the water, changed out of my clothes back into my hiking clothes, walked to where the property was, grabbed the boat, came back and got my stuff, went back to the property, grabbed my pack, and walked out again. I think I calculated it. So in the course of about 3 days, I walked about 60 kilometers. It was a very memorable experience, but I can remember swimming across that bay and just going afterwards going, oh my God, what did I just do? Because I could have very easily, become quite tired and drown. I sort of look back on that now in my older years and kind of think how kind of dumb I was to do something like that. So that was an honorable mention. Another honorable mention that I'm going to talk about is a bunch of years later, kind of a little bit more recent history. Back in 2010, I had done a hike on the Port Arthur, Duluth, and Western, and I had been hiking just to the west of Nallaloo, near a place called Hillside, and I was following along something called the Beaver Creek, and there was a series, quite a number of bridges that crossed back and forth across this creek, and there was, I think, 10 or 11 bridges, and so it was a really neat area to explore. And so I had previously been through there, and so I was kind of going back with my GPS and sort of documenting, and I still don't know how this happened, but somewhere right at kind of the turning point of the hike, I had bumped into or smacked into, or it had smacked me, a thorn bush, and it had hit me in the bottom part of, I can't remember, it's got to be maybe my right leg, right below kind of my calf muscle, and had embedded a piece of thorn in. I could feel it in there, and I could remember being in excruciating pain, having to walk all the way back, and then kind of, once I got home, I could feel that there was something still stuck. And Luna's coming, and she wants to kind of cuddle a little bit, something stuck in the bottom of my calf. And it took I would say the better part of 2 weeks for this little piece, and I'll flash a picture up on the screen, a little piece of thorn. It probably was about a centimeter, about half an inch long, eventually worked its way out of my leg. And I remember kind of pulling it out, and this chunk of thorn, and so for a couple of weeks there, I was sort of in a bit of pain, and I was sort of hobbling around as a result of this thorn being stuck in me. And then another honorable mention was, again, sort of a little bit further to the west of that. This would have been in the summer of 2015, and I was hiking on Gunflint Lake in the summer. I want to say it was July, I think. And I was hiking on the grade of the Gunflint and Lake Superior, the logging railway that connected to the Port Arthur, Duluth, and Western. And I was trying to trace part of it on the eastern side of Gunflint Lake. And what had happened was that, previously this area had been wide open and it was very easy to walk along, but there was the massive 1999 windstorm that had knocked down all these trees, and then the 2007 forest fire. And it was very difficult to walk along the grade. I remember, trying to follow with the grade, and it's impossible to seem that I kind of got lost, but I quite literally got lost. And, I was stumbling along trying to follow the grade, and, tripping over deadfall, and it was extremely hot outside. It was in excess of 30 degrees Celsius, and I was once I had sort of reoriented myself and kind of got myself back to my starting point, I remember just being utterly and totally exhausted by this hike. Okay, so those are the honorable mentions that I ended up spending about 10 minutes talking about. So let's talk about some of the worst experiences. So probably in the top two is one that happened back in 2016. So in the spring of 2016, I had taken the boys with me, and we were going again down to the Boundary Waters area. We had driven in to this property that friends of ours owned on North Lake, and we were going to take the boat all the way to the junction of Little Gunflint and Gunflint Lake, and we were going to explore part of the Gunflint and Lake Superior Railroad in the part that's on Ontario. And we were going to do it in the springtime because the leaves are down and it's much easier to see things. So at the time, the boys would have been, I think Ethan would have been 11 and Noah would have been 9 or somewhere in that age range. So 2016, Ethan would have been 11, Noah not quite been 9. So we make our way, and one of the challenging areas is between Little North and Little Gunflint. And so essentially what happened is there's a very narrow creek that separates the area. And when they were building the railroad, they actually built what was called the Marine Railroad. And so basically it's a small little railroad that was operated by a winch that allowed boats to move back and forth without having to use the waterway. Now, because it was spring and the water was high, the water flowing through that waterway was moving very rapidly. Like I've been there, and for example, back in the 90s, I'd been through there in the late summer, and you literally had to drag the boat through because there was so little water that the boat was kind of dragging on the bottom. Because it was spring, the water was moving very, very quickly, and I remember it was kind of a bit of a challenge getting downstream because the water from North Lake and those chain of lakes actually flows to the west and then eventually north and empties into Hudson's Bay. So it's on the other side of the watershed. And we got through okay, so going towards our destination. While coming back, all of a sudden it became this odyssey because now we were trying to pull this boat, and it's not like I had a few adults with me. I've got a couple of kids. And so, basically they can help me a little bit, but I'm sort of reliant on myself. Now I have to drag this boat upstream through this rapidly flowing water, and it's become very, very difficult. So I couldn't even get my boat into the creek. And, I'm sort of to think about, like, how am I going to get this up? I actually have to drag this up. And so I can remember, the look on my boy's face. Like Ethan was okay, but Noah, my younger one, he can almost start to panic. And he started to cry because he's like, oh my God, we're going to get trapped here and we're never going to get this boat back upstream. And so what ended up happening was I ended up using the anchor rope and attaching that to the front of the boat, tying that off on trees alongside the creek, and then basically going into the creek. And now it's May. The water is cold. I'm up to my waist or up to my stomach in water, and I'm literally pulling the boat ahead and then having the rope retied, right? And slowly but surely dragging the boat upstream. And it's not a short distance. It's a little ways. Again, I don't know the exact measurement. I'll have to put the number up on the screen there, but it took us a while to get the boat dragged through all the way to the other side. And again, like I said, Noah's upset. He's crying, oh my God, we're going to get stuck here. And I remember at one point, and I'll flash the picture up there, I took a selfie with my phone, right? And it shows us kind of dragging the boat up. And I think that was a sort of a memorable experience for that. And it just made me think of one that I almost forgot, sort of in the same area, that a few years earlier back, I think it was about 2011 or 2011 or 2012, we had gone in the area with the boat, and we had gotten to our destination. We had looked around, we'd done a bunch of things, and then we go back and the boat won't start. And so we're like, oh my God, so now we're, a ways from where we need to go back, and I can't get the boat started. And so I'm trying, I've got two little kids with me. I'm trying to paddle back. And I can remember myself getting a little bit sort of panicked, and thankfully a boat came by. Somebody up from the American side was going over to North Lake, and I managed to flag them down. And I said, if worst case worst, these guys can give me a tow to where I need to go. Thankfully, one of the guys managed to get the boat started. And so we were able to make our way back. But I can remember that one. I was panicked, right? Because I couldn't figure out how the heck I was going to get back to my destination. So I've had some really good experiences out on out on the Boundary Waters. Now, probably in more recent history, the worst experience I had was actually last summer. So the summer of 2022, we were out hiking east of Geraldton. We started our hike. We actually drove to the starting point, and then we had to boat in to the Kinghorn Rail Grade to start our hike at Devilfish Bay on Connogomisus Lake. So everything went fine. Everything went great. The beginning part of the hike, I actually did an episode of Luna's Adventures. I had the camera on her. I put a link in the description. You could take a look at that. And, we got to the grade, and we got all the way to our destination, which was Connogomisus Dam Road. And then we started making our way back. And as we started heading back, I started noticing that Luna was kind of lagging behind a little bit. And I was kind of, thinking about it. I was kind of a little bit sort of concerned. And then I'll actually put this piece of video up as I'm talking. So there was one point where we had reached, I want to say reached milepost 12 in the area. And I noticed, and we had the piece prior to that was a section that had been reballasted. So they had put new stone down at some point after the original work was done in the early 80s. And it was a different type of rock. And I noticed it was very challenging for me to bike through. And that must have been where it all got started, because you'll see in the video that I'm kind of talking and I'm kind of looking back because I'm wondering where Luna is, because usually she's right behind me. And it took her a while to kind of catch up. And so, we kind of started moving forward from milepost 12, and about a little ways past there was a small little trestle over a creek. And so again, Luna's kind of lagging behind. And I remember I had Noah sort of stay behind and kind of go with her because she was being so slow. We got to the trestle, and I thought, okay, maybe she's tired, maybe she's thirsty, she hasn't drank enough. So I take her down to the creek to drink. And so she takes a drink, she drinks a little bit, and as she kind of steps back, she rears up like this with her paws, and I can see that her paws are all torn up and mangled. I don't know what happened. I only thing I could figure is that going on that different ballast that had maybe torn up her paws because the rocks were sharp. You could just see they were all bloody, and I was like, now the panic starts to hit me. Like, oh my God, like can she even walk? So I remember what I did was I left her behind with Noah, and I said, okay, you walk with her because we're on our bikes. You walk with her. I'm going to go ahead to milepost 13. Then I'll come back for you guys. So I went, came back. They're still walking along. Luna's moving very, very slowly. We get to milepost 13, and you can see that she can't really go, like she's lying down and she doesn't want to move. So I said, okay, Noah, you stay with her. I'm going to go ahead. I'll finish the hike because we were going just past milepost 14. So we got about a mile and a bit. And I'll come back, and then we'll somehow or another get the dog. Hopefully we can walk with her. So I do that. I finish the hike. I come back, and now it's getting hot. We're slowing down, and it's getting hotter and hotter as the day goes on. So finally I go back, and they haven't moved from milepost 13, right? So like Luna does not want to move because her paws are so badly torn up. And I'm like, what are we going to do now? So I'm like, well, I'm going to have to carry her. So I had Noah sort of hold the bikes and walk with the bikes, and I picked her up like this in my arms and started carrying her. Well, the problem is that she's a 60-pound dog, and there's only so long you can carry her like this in your arms. So I had to carry her for a little bit and put her down, and then pick her up and carry her a little bit. And I'm like, okay, this is not working. I can't carry her like this. And I will actually be talking about this in an episode this coming summer when we do another companions episode. And I'm going to be because I didn't take any pictures or anything, I'm going to kind of try to recreate that in that episode. But eventually what I ended up doing was having Noah pick her up and put her on my shoulders, across the back of my neck and my shoulders, with her paws dangling across the front. And me basically kind of stooped over with the 60 pounds on my shoulders and my neck, walking forward. And we had to kind of do it like 300-400 meters at a time, where I would walk and then have to stop and put her down and catch my breath, and then put her back up and walk. So it had to have taken us like well over an hour to walk I think it ended up being 2.5 kilometers or something like that back to where the boat was. And it was just an awful experience. I finally get back to the boat. We get to the boat. I get Luna in the boat. We get back to where the truck is parked. We load it up. You can just see her paws are completely mangled. And it probably took her about 3 days or 4 days to recover from that. Like she couldn't walk. Here I am trying to keep her paws clean, trying to keep them, from being infected. She wasn't eating properly, and it was just, oh my God, it was a mess. And so now, if you've probably seen some of my episodes of Offbeat Adventures, after that, I went and bought a trailer. So I have a trailer for some of the longer hikes. So what it will do is hopefully alleviate the fact that she won't have to walk as far. So I've used it after that. And what I did was I basically let her walk the outbound part, and then basically put her in the trailer and hauled her back on the inbound portion, right, where we're biking a little bit faster. And so that way she can just sit in the trailer. It's a bit of a challenge trying to get her to sit in the trailer. Anyway, that was probably my worst experience in recent memory of, trying to carry the dog that distance in that heat, and, just kind of almost on the borderline of panic, going, oh my God, because in other places, right, I could just walk back, get in the truck, and then bring the truck forward and get her into the vehicle, and then, away we go. But there's no way I could do that, right? I had to get her to the boat and then go from there. So just not a great experience, that one was. All right, so let's take a look at the better stuff. Let's take a look at the positive stuff. And I kind of struggled a little bit with this one, because it was like, you always think of the bad stuff, right? It's kind of like, being a teacher, and you always kind of remember the kids that were a bit problematic or kind of drove you crazy a little bit. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to kind of remember the positive ones, because the negative experiences kind of stick in your head a little bit. And so in terms of the best ones, honorable mentions, I can, think of some of the hikes I went on and some of the things that I was able to find. Kind of my mind goes to things like, some more obscure things that had been sort of, kind of not looked at in a long period of time, right? So things like turning Ys, the turning Y at North Lake Station, the turning Y at Coughlin on the Kinghorn, which had not been used since the 1930s. One that I did recently, the turning Y at Jellicoe, and kind of going through those. The difference is that those kind of were, maybe not sort of real groundbreaking, discoveries, because they were like, well, you mean it's just a kind of a turning Y. It's not something particularly significant, right? I mean, maybe it's something that, other people had seen in the past, right? So really my attention kind of goes to two big things that I've kind of maybe very proud of in terms of some of the discoveries that I've made, or some of the best hiking experiences. So the first one goes back to the year 2017, and it involves the work that I'm doing that still hasn't finished yet on the Pigeon River Lumber Company, and specifically the Gunflint Lake Superior Railroad, which is the logging railroad that runs down the eastern side of Gunflint Lake, and was used to harvest timber around the turn of the century. So basically, in my course of my research, I had discovered that there was one logging camp that most people knew about on the southeast shore of Gunflint Lake. Well, eventually it came to my attention that there was yet another logging camp. So the first one was known as Camp 4, and then there was another camp that was constructed later on called Camp 8, and this was kind of built in the 1906, 1907 time frame. And the question was where this was located. And camp number 4 is clearly marked on a prominent map. And the problem was the other one was not located. And so now the question became is where was it? And so there was a lot of time poring over aerial photographs, trying to find something on there, looking at some other maps, looking at possible locations. And so basically what it boiled down to was me kind of, following along the grade and using that as kind of a starting point. And so in 2007, I had been sort of hiking and sort of following the grade in the area sort of southeast of Gunflint Lake. And what ended up happening is I came across a location that I started finding some debris, and that led me to go north of the grade into the brush. And lo and behold, I start finding the foundations of buildings. And there was one that first kind of jumped out at me, and I believe that one was the bunkhouse. And you could basically see this rock berm. Okay, so they had basically put up these pieces of rock that they built this berm, and you can actually see some of the timbers still sitting on top of the berm. And then I started identifying other structures, right? So there were 3 for sure prominent structures that had these sort of rock berms, and you could see traces of wood on top of them. And then you started finding other, foundations behind them. And so eventually what I was able to do was put together kind of an idea of what this sort of camp looked like, with 3 buildings kind of on the south side, a couple of smaller buildings to the north. Potentially could have been things like a blacksmith shop. I think one for sure was a blacksmith shop. Another one was certainly the latrine or the outhouse. Another one may have been some sort of storage building, or some sort of building for maybe train crews or things like that. It certainly looked like it had a stove in there. You could see on another side, you could actually see what looked like the foundations of the berms for a couple of stables, because they look like pretty large sized buildings. And so that was like an amazing discovery. This is something that had not been seen potentially for over 100 years. Now, I think there may have been somebody that had been in the area after this. I did see some marking tape here and there. I don't know who it was that was in this area, but I think for me, it was basically making that connection back to what this structure actually was and who it sort of belonged to, and certainly relaying that information to the U.S. Forest Service, because it is sits on land that is part of Superior National Forest, and having some of their people kind of go and take a look, and hopefully in the future actually doing a real sort of archaeological exploration at this site, and kind of determining what are all the buildings and structures that are located there. So that was one of my more proud accomplishments, to actually find this and sort of, relate it back to all the history that I uncovered. So that was one in 2017. And then probably a more recent one was in the summer of 2021. On the Kinghorn line, I was actually able to trace and follow an old diversion of the line. And so this information had been passed along to me by a gentleman by the name of Jeff. And Jeff's been great because he provides me with all kinds of information about the rail line, a lot of railway timetables and information. So he had basically told me about the fact that in the 1940s, there was a piece of grade just to the west of Beardmore near Warneford Station that had been rerouted because of the fact that there was a couple trestles that had caused impediments on the Blackwater River in terms of rafting logs. And so what ended up happening was in the spring of 2021, I had done a hike in the area, and I actually found the both ends of where this diversion had happened, right? So in the area, the railway grade had crossed just east of Warneford, had crossed the Blackwater River, had run for a short distance on the north side of the river, and then crossed back onto the south side, and then eventually linking into Warneford Station. So in that spring 2021 hike, I was actually able to find both abutments of the trestle. So there was two 350-foot trestles that ran across the river, and so I was able to find the abutments of those. I was able to find some of the piles. So that summer, I went back in the beginning of August when the water level was down, and what I did was I was able to sort of walk the grade, and I'll put a link to this video in the description, and you'll be able to sort of watch the video of this. So the water was much lower. You could see all of the piles on the eastern side. As I crossed the river, you can see some of the piles in the river, and then I followed this piece of grade on the north side of the bank, and again, kind of into sort of, not quite virgin territory, but something that had not really been seen in, almost 80 years, right? The trains had not run on this section, and then eventually coming back out to the second trestle, again, seeing all the piles in the water and sort of seeing where it links back up with the more modern grade. The only disappointment was I thought I would go in there and I would see old telegraph poles and maybe old insulators on the telegraph pole. Didn't see anything like that, which was very, very disappointing. But again, it was really neat to sort of find this piece of grade that nobody had seen for such a long period of time, and able to sort of add it to the history of the railway line. And then the adventure of actually, because I thought I was going to go there and I didn't know what the water depth was going to be like. I was totally prepared. I was might have to do some swimming to get to the other side. Thankfully, it was just a matter of kind of walking through the water. I had put my Crocs on. I waded through the water and then put my hiking boots back on, and was able to sort of follow the grade without without a lot of difficulty, and sort of make my way back, and I didn't have to swim or anything like that, but it certainly was a bit of an adventure. So again, you can see the link to that video in the description, and you can kind of take a look at what I did with that. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Certainly a lot to talk about. It's almost like as I started going through some of these things, I started jogging more memories of challenging hikes that I had, or really great hikes that I had. I'm sure there's probably more that will come to me, in the time afterwards. And, as I sort of think about it a little bit more, there's probably things that I missed or, didn't really talk about. Certainly this has been a bit longer episode, again, because there's a lot of stuff to do, and there's a lot of stories to kind of relay, and certainly I like to talk about them. But anyway, this kind of brings us to the end of the episode. We will come back in the future with another Q&A episode. And if you have any ideas or any thoughts about questions that you might want to ask me, or questions that you might want to see me answer, please don't be afraid to put them in the comments, or just send me a message or an email, and certainly I can address those types of things. So anyway, thanks for tuning in today, and we'll be back next month with yet another episode. But in the meantime, take care and stay safe.